Welcome to the newest episode, a midweek edition of Beatin' and Bangin'. I'm your host, Kyle Dalton. In today's video, I've got multiple stories to discuss, including the comments I heard yesterday on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio by Larry McReynolds about one important part of NASCAR that America's crew chief said just isn't very good. That was early in the day. Later in the day, I listened to Hailie Deegan's 30-minute interview with Kenny Wallace on the Kenny Conversation. And interestingly, the 23-year-old offered her perspective on the same subject. She also touched on a few other topics I'll discuss as well, including why she thinks NASCAR drivers are dramatic. In addition, I want to break down the TV numbers from this past weekend of the NASCAR Cup Series race from Vegas and its head-to-head competition with F1 and the U.S. Grand Prix. I think the data reveals it's a good sign for both racing series. And finally, sticking with numbers, we'll have our weekly By the Numbers segment and our last 5 races analysis. It's really interesting to see who's at the top, especially compared to what it looked like just a few weeks ago. However, before we get to that, I want to go back to yesterday on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio. I was listening to Larry Mack and Danielle Trotta on their on-track show, and they were talking about William Sawalich driving the number 18 Joe Gibbs racing car in the Xfinity Series next year. That discussion drifted off into NASCAR's business model and drivers paying to race. America's crew chief didn't sugarcoat what he thought about it.
Danielle, and I bet you'll agree with me, if I took my notebook piece of paper here, I drew a line down the middle. And on the left side, I put drivers that brought money. And then on the right side, I put drivers that brought money that had talent. If we just look at the last 10 years, I could probably fill both columns up, because there is drivers there's a lot of them that they bring money, they bring a sponsor, they bring family money, but to your point about William Sawalich, he brings talent. We've already seen it, but we know there is a long list of kids that's drug a check through the door of an operation. It's like, What in the world is going on here? This is just not very good.
Not very good. That's how old Larry Mack views it. The fans view it the same way because it's not the same in any other sport. NFL, MLB, NBA, golf, tennis, any sport you want to list, the top athletes have made their way to the top on talent, not money. Harry McReynolds provided one perspective, but it was really interesting to have those words as the backdrop when I heard Hailie Deegan comment on the same topic when talking about her fiancé Chase Cabre during her appearance with Kenny Wallace on his Kenny Conversation. Take a listen.
He's one of the most talented drivers I've ever seen that never got an opportunity past ARCA. And that's just how racing is. Racing's money. It's what it is. Like, as much as people don't want to admit it or kind of fake it that it's not, you gotta have money, whether it's sponsor money or family money, whatever it is.
But that wasn't all she had to say on the topic. She raised the subject a few minutes later when talking about the family number of 38 and merchandise.
And it's cool for me because when it comes to the merchandise side of things, that I can have that family number, because that's a huge point for me. I am someone who runs strictly off sponsor money. If my sponsor money gets cut, I'm done. That's just how it is.
Now, I know Deegan gets a lot of flack, but I have to give her credit here for candidly admitting that racing is all about who has money and acknowledging if her sponsors go away, her racing career goes with it. Sticking with Deegan and what she had to say to Wallace, she delicately talked about how she feels watching the poor results of the number 15 AM racing car since she left in July. And she also discussed one of the reasons she wanted to pursue a shot at the Indy NXT series.
No, and the fitness side of things is something that really attracted me to the IndyCar side, because I love fitness. And so I like that that's actually utilized where in NASCAR it's not. In NASCAR, you don't have to be in shape in any sort of form. As much as people want to say, oh, it's hot. It's hot. You have air conditioning and a cool suit. Calm down. It's not.
You've seen the movie.
Yeah. Everyone's very dramatic in that sense on the NASCAR side.
I'm sure the NASCAR drivers would beg to differ. Moving on to our next topic, and it's the television ratings from this past weekend's races. I say races because I'm comparing Sunday's Cup Series race against the F1 race, which ran at the same time. According to reports, NBC had 2.3 million viewers watching Sunday's NASCAR race at Las Vegas, while ABC had 1.3 million tuning in for the F1 race right here in Austin. On the surface, some fans naturally want to point out how NASCAR beat F1. While that is technically true, I think the most important piece of those numbers is how they compare to 2023. Both the Cup and F1 race saw increases of more than 100,000 viewers over last year. I think that's really encouraging because, as they say, a rising tide lifts all ships. NASCAR and F1 are both growing in popularity. I can't really speak to the F1 side because I don't cover it, but I can speak to what's happening on the NASCAR side. I've seen it over the last few years. There are consistently more fans sitting in the stands of the races I have attended. I'm talking noticeably larger at each race. And as much as some of the sky is falling fans would like you to believe that NASCAR is failing and on its way out, that sentiment just isn't accurate based on my firsthand experience and what I've witnessed. The numbers also reflect that in the television ratings. As far as F1 is concerned, you can see it in the number of fans who show up to their races. COTA was absolutely packed this past weekend. I know I've talked in the past and compared the two series, and how I wasn't a fan of F1 because it was never competitive on a regular basis, with Max Verstappen winning all the time. That has changed this year, and I think if that trend holds, there's no reason to believe F1 won't continue to attract new fans who are like me and didn't follow it closely because they didn't like seeing the same driver win every weekend. And finally, it's time to move on to our last story of the day, and it's our By the Numbers segment. This week, it's going to be a simple breakdown of our last 5 races, and instead of doing what I've done in the last several weeks and focusing on the playoff drivers, I want to include all the field because I think it's really interesting to see how it's changed over the last month. Taking a look at it, and the one thing that is obvious from the start, Christopher Bell and William Byron are on another level in those last 5 races. The Joe Gibbs Racing pilot has posted a crazy impressive average finishing position of 4.4 during that time. Incredibly, his worst finish is a 7th at Kansas. On his heels is the number 24 pilot, who has been really good as well with an AFP of 5.8. His 17th place finish at Bristol dramatically increasing his number. Coming in at numbers 3 and 4 are Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin with averages of 8.6 and 8.8 respectively. The rest of the top 10 fascinates me because it includes just one playoff driver, Chase Elliott, which speaks to the struggles of the playoff contenders in the postseason. Bubba Wallace has been solid over the last 5 races with an AFP of 10.0 even. But look who's there at number 6, Martin Truex Jr. It was just over a month ago that we were talking about the struggles of the number 19 car, and he was at the very bottom of this list. I mean, dead last. But he's put together 3 really good races in the last 5 race stretch, including a 3rd at Kansas and a 6th at Las Vegas. Rounding out the top 10 are Chris Buescher, Alex Bowman, Elliott, and check out who's number 10, Zane Smith. The rookie has an average finishing position of 16.4 in the last 5 and has been steady with 4 top 20 results, including a 10th at Kansas. Smith struggled early in the year but has really turned it around during the back half of the season. And the last driver of note in our last 5 analysis is Tyler Reddick. The regular season champ has struggled to his AFP of 22.2 with 4 finishes of 20th or worse, including his worst finish in the group coming last weekend at Las Vegas when he flipped and finished 35th. It's also crazy to see his numbers when compared to his fellow 23 Racing teammate, Bubba Wallace. You know the organization would love to flip those results. All right, guys, that's a wrap on this episode. I want to get your thoughts on all of it. First, let's start with the remarks of Larry Mack yesterday on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio on NASCAR's broken business model. He talked about making a list of pay drivers with talent and just pay drivers. Who would be on your list? And what did you think about Hailie Deegan's remarks on the subject of money and racing during her talk with Kenny Wallace? I applaud her for being very candid on the subject. Also, what do you think of the rising number of viewers for both NASCAR and F1? Did you watch both races last weekend? And finally, what did you think of our last 5 races analysis? Any surprises in there for you? Thank you guys, as always, for checking out the latest video and supporting the channel. I really appreciate it and hope you have a great rest of your day.